New alarm bells ringing tonight on the coronavirus outbreak in this country.
Doctors say the virus is spread through droplets when someone coughs or sneezes.
And I think the business community, it's in their interest that people actually stay home and stop the spread.
For a business that can allow more employees to telecommute, we want you to do that.
Hi, friends. I'm Andy Paul, host of the Sales Enablement Podcast, and I want to encourage you to listen to my brand new special 6-part podcast miniseries titled Selling with Purpose. The team behind Sales Enablement Podcast and I put together this incredible series of inspiring conversations exploring what it means to sell with a mission greater than just hitting your numbers in this era of COVID-19 and beyond. So tune in to hear from world-class enterprise sales leaders and learn how their 6 companies will close $50 billion selling remotely. See how they've supported essential workers with the products and services they need to stay safe and thrive during this time of crisis. Subscribe to Selling with a Purpose now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Guided selling from RingDNA makes your entire sales team more effective by revealing exactly what reps should do and when to do it. Guided selling works by transforming sales data into a curated list of prioritized sales actions. So when reps start their day, they'll never again wonder which prospects and accounts or hot inbound leads to reach out to next. Guided selling even shifts reps' priority in response to real-time buying signals. Finally, even new reps can sell like seasoned ones. Let RingDNA be your guide to success. Learn more at ringdna.com/guided selling. That's ringdna.com/guided selling.
My manager was a wizard at metrics. I mean, he just had them left, right, and center. And I was a great person to be around early in my sales career to really master that. And our call to close rate was 2%. And the amount of money the company threw to turn that 2% into a 3 was insane. And I just kept thinking to myself, 98% of what I'm going to do is pointless? Like, what? I couldn't get over that. I'm like, who cares about the 2%? What about the 98? Why don't we take that down 10 percentage points? Why would that not be the obsession of the company? To be like, oh my God, you fools spend 98% of your time with no success? Gracious.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. Now, that was Belal Batrawy, and he's the founder of Death to Fluff. I love that name. And Belal and I are going to talk about why he believes it's time to elevate the thinking and understanding of how sales should be done. Now, what I really enjoyed about this conversation with Belal was having the opportunity to talk with a bright young voice in sales, a person still at the beginning of their sales career, at least in a relative sense compared to me, who has taken the time to think very deeply about sales and how we do it. You know, like his Death to Fluff movement. You know, there's way too much fluff in all of the sales advice put out there today, and I respect the way Belal is willing to put his beliefs out there. So we're going to dive into a wide range of topics, including what and who are the major influences and how most sellers learn how to sell, and what that means for sales management, what sales management needs to learn in order to better help sellers improve their performance. So we'll get into all this and much, much more. But before we get to Belal, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could also give us your feedback about how we're doing in the form of a review. So thank you. And if you haven't already connected with me on LinkedIn, please do. LinkedIn.com/in/real-Andy-Paul. All right, let's jump into it. Belal, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Andy. It's an honor.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you here. So where have you been hiding out the last few months?
I've been in Atlanta. My wife works at Grady Hospital, so she's like seeing all the horror. So we weren't even playing around in the beginning. We knew because we were just seeing what was happening in the hospital. And we're like, no, this is some real stuff.
Yeah, I know. It's the same thing. My wife is a professor and dean at NYU School of Medicine, and right there at the major medical center Lower Manhattan, and yeah, it was no question, it was real, very real.
Yep.
So, well, so here's a question I like to ask people: is what's the biggest lesson you've learned about yourself during the pandemic?
Ooh, that's a great question. What's the biggest lesson I learned about myself? I have grown to be extremely patient with my children through this pandemic. I got 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, both of them boys. Anything that can fall, they will make sure it tries
does,
to.
right?
Yeah, they'll give it a good go, and all that kind of stuff that you would expect. If they look at the wall, it seems to get a mark. You know what I mean? Like they just have a knack for certain things, and I've just now I'm just so mellow. Like they'll just be chaos, and I could just close my eyes and kind of relax. And I was like, "How are you?" I'm like, "I don't know. I've developed a superpower now, where I'm cool with it."
Well, is your wife able to develop the same level of equanimity about things?
No, which makes her, she just hates me for it. But I'm like, one of us had to, and it was me.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. So you've got this thing on Bravado. People should check out Bravado if they aren't aware of it, but called Death to Fluff. And so, what is Death to Fluff?
Yeah, it was just born out of a joke between some friends of mine that I was annoying every single day in the early days when I started posting on LinkedIn. And it was just like, yeah, death to fluff. Let's no more fluff. And it kind of took a life of its own, and people started using it back. That's when I knew it was cool. I was like, oh, okay, it's not just it's not just in my head. Like people actually think this might be a cool thing to say, because some people started hashtagging it back in the comments of my posts, and I just ran with it. I was like, all right, let's make this the slogan. Let's unite.
All right. So what is the fluff, though?
The fluff is all this nonsense today that people just in general talk about in sales. I mean, you can find yourself endlessly scrolling on LinkedIn, and occasionally there might be one or two very meaningful conversations, but it's let's talk about even just recently. There's just overflow of screenshots of people's team meetings on Zoom, a picture of your work from home desk, some sort of fluffy thing about be courageous and be empathetic, or cold calling is dead, or it's alive, or it's somewhere in between. And I'm like, what? None of this is worth even posting. There should be a limit on how much you can post of this.
Well, LinkedIn has become Facebook.
Yeah, that's what people say. I don't disagree either. I don't disagree.
I mean, yeah, I agree with you. There's a dearth of insight. So when we make the transition to making it more social, it sort of becomes a little less serious. One of the things I've noticed, and I don't know if you've seen this, is first of all, there's been in the last 90 days this what seemingly exponential growth in the number of experts on LinkedIn,
myself included,
saying that well, no, I'm not pointing at you. Is saying that one of my favorite phrases is, because I get direct messages from people saying, they identify some problem and they're saying, we've been in some vague solution and the phrase is that just driving nuts is, we've been doing a lot of this these days with companies like yours. It's like a lot of this. Okay, what is this, right? This is sort of unspecified. And this is almost common pitches, I guess I'm receiving these days.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Nice and lazy.
Yeah. And I'm getting, again, and don't know about you, but I'm getting, I've spent probably 12 years on LinkedIn and never once getting sort of a solicitation from a financial planner, insurance salesperson, any sort of financial related products. And now it's daily activity.
Yeah, it really is. And it's so noisy, and people, what drives me crazy, Andy, is how, I mean, I just don't see how these people don't realize that your message is in a sea of messages. And if it's boring and dull and has nothing to say in it, and it's not important. Why do you think sending it 1,000 times is going to do it any better than sending it 10 times? It's not. Nobody cares. It's going to get deleted. It's not working yet. Somehow everybody's still trying the same formula and recipe, and it's like, am I the one taking crazy pills? Like, does nobody understand the importance of being original here? You gotta just stand out, just in any way, shape, or form. Just find the way. And sometimes I laugh at my own advice because I'm like, it's so stupid. But then I go back to my messages in my inbox. I'm like, no, people need to hear it.
Well, but you've referred to that, and recently on, I think, LinkedIn, as you're saying that you're calling for it's time to elevate the thinking and understanding of how sales should be done. So tell me about that. So, I mean, I like it. I mean, I think you and I talked beforehand about how much I'm in agreement with that. So what aspect of it do you think we need to elevate? I mean, in the understanding, I mean, there's been so little actual research done on sales and what works and so on. This is a business that's still fundamentally, and I know a lot of people don't like this, is it's still fundamentally an apprenticeship.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
This is how people learn. And it's not like there's one way of doing it that works across the board.
No, there's not. It's very true. You know, I say that myself. It's a trade skill. It's like, if I want to be a master carpenter, I don't pick up, carpentry for dummies. That's not how it works. I go study under master carpenter, and I will learn their techniques, and then I can go and apply it and build on that. Sales is the same way. It's not some haphazard thing, or you're not born with it. And, because you were, a former ex-jock and you're hungry or whatever, you're going to just crush it out there. That's not how it works. That's just simply not how it works. The modern day seller has to be part psychologist, part, tech enabled, and totally, process driven, has to be, a master of content marketing. There's so many demands now that a seller needs to be that just didn't even exist 10 years ago.
But at the same time, there's these conflicting, interests or motivations, if you will, is and you've referred to this in things that you've written as well, is that we've mechanized, automated sales behaviors that have been going on forever, and somehow think now they're new. Right. And so just by the fact that we've enabled them with technology, we somehow think that they're higher order evolved sales motions, when it's just the same old crap we've been doing for 50, 70, 80, 100 years.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why I think when we think, okay, somebody I was just talking to was saying, oh, it's time for a revolution 3.0 of sales. And I was like, well, where was the first revolution? I mean, just the fact we automated things didn't mean that we changed. Right. It's there's a lot of demands on sellers these days, but by the same token, I interested in your opinion on this is, I feel like more than ever, sales is about being compliant to a process, as opposed to saying, how do I enable my people to become the best version of themselves?
Oh, that's interesting. Wait, okay, let me repeat that. So more being compliant to the process than being the best people they can be. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And you've referred to this in your own writing about, hey, I'm writing somebody up because they don't hit their call metrics. It's like, well, screw the call metrics. You want to have a certain number of conversations. If somebody could get the right number of conversations with half the calls, that should be good.
Rejoice, and cherish the moment and figure out why. I agree. Yeah.
Because sales has become, in the parlance of what people like to sort of try to contrast themselves and set aside this sort of current wave as quote unquote modern sellers, which I always get amused at, is they're just doing the same old things. And it's all about efficiency as opposed to effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not as concerned about, the perfect example I give people is, we talk about win rates. Okay, is what percentage of your qualified opportunities are you closing? And using that as a win rate metric. And in SaaS in general, it's relatively low from my perspective. Certainly, when I've in my career coming up through sales,
Yeah.
But no one ever talks about how do we increase that. It's always about if we want to sell more, given that we have this win rate, we put more stuff into the top of the funnel and we know what our conversion rates are throughout our various stages. That will help us drive more revenue rather than saying, well, we've got a certain amount of stuff in the pipeline. What if we could double the number of deals that we close?
Right.
With the same pipeline.
Let's even flip it for a second. This was always frustrating for me. And my first entry into the sales world, our close rate, my manager was a wizard, Andy, at metrics. I mean, he just had them left, right, and center. And I was a great person to be around early in my sales career to really master that. And our call to close rate was 2%. And the amount of money the company threw to turn that 2% into a 3 was insane. And I just kept thinking to myself, 98% of what I'm going to do is pointless? Like, what? I couldn't get over that. I'm like, who cares about the 2%? What about the 98? Why don't we take that down 10 percentage points? Like, why would that not be the obsession of the company? To be like, oh my God, you fools spend 98% of your time with no success? Gracious. What are you doing? What are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, I gave a keynote at a conference last year and to a SaaS audience and said, well, okay, if we've got a 20% close rate or win rate, off your most qualified opportunities, I mean, the ones you're working actively in your pipeline, what are you training your sellers to do? Lose.
Yeah.
Right? I'm practicing.
Yeah.
I'm spending 82% of my time losing.
Yeah.
So what's the habit I'm developing? I'm developing the habit of losing.
Right.
So we're not going to win every one, right? But
no.
There's this great quote that I love from Edwards Deming, who is, if you're familiar with him, but he was a famous business thinker back in the 50s and 60s. He's an American guy that basically he got ignored by the car companies in the United States and took his theory of total quality management to Japan and revolutionized the Japanese auto industry.
Oh, yep. I know you're going with this. Yep.
And then came right back. But he has this famous quote that he says, and the quote is, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets.
Yes. I love that.
So you think about your example or my example, a 20% win rate or 2% call to win rate, or that was call to win or call to close, whatever. It was like, yeah, that's what your system's set up. Of course you're going to get that.
Yep.
You've designed it that way. So I have this question for CROs and CEOs that I've consulted with and so on. I says, well, let's do it differently. What's the win rate you want? Right? And then let's work backwards and say, how do we get there? How do we engineer our process to get there?
Yeah. But you know what? They don't. That's really taxing on the modern day sales leader. Look, and I'm gonna throw out some shots. Well, I was gonna say,
before you do, because I say the problem with a lot of them is that they don't know how to sell.
Yeah. I mean, it's true, right? It's true, and like, I'm of the opinion, maybe I'm being a little bit glass half empty or whatever, but I'm of the opinion, like, I've kind of given up on today's sales leaders. I'd rather try to influence the SDRs and AEs of today that will be, the directors and VPs in 5 to 6 years, and just kind of, give up on this lost generation, because I'm like, I can't tolerate anymore. I'll give you a small example. Today, I read a great article that was written back in 2005 in the Harvard Business Review around a gentleman that was using Six Sigma applied to sales pricing.
Right.
Brilliant. A brilliant article. And then I'm like, that's wonderful. 2005, gracious. 15 years ago. Wow. What's happened since? And so I wanted to Google search, can I find a course that's sales oriented, puts on the floaties for me a little bit, but Six Sigma still, and can give me that core principles of understanding so that I can apply that cutting waste mentality to my process and pipeline. It doesn't exist. We're in 2020. And if you Google search, sales, Six Sigma and sales, you'll find a bunch of just, bottom feeder stuff on the first page of Google. And it's shocking to me, right? That today's modern sales leaders haven't been chiming for that aren't just eager to jump all in on that and master those concepts to the benefit of their own businesses and their own careers, because again, they're hammering away at incremental improvement instead of exponential efficiency
or exponential effectiveness.
Yep.
Right. I mean, so, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that one example I love to give when I talk with audiences is, I assume you're a member of Modern Sales Pros.
Yep.
Okay. So, I took for the audience a screenshot of like, I don't know, maybe the 25 most current threads that were in my distant Gmail inbox. And we just looked at the title of the threads. And so I put it up on the screen. I said, everybody, take a minute. Some Modern Sales Pros, take a minute and look at these and tell me what's missing. And I haven't done this for a year, but I'm going to presume it's still current. This test is when you go through the titles of the discussion threads, none of them are about sales. They're all about comp, process, technology, so on. But I would drop over dead if someone posted something on there that said, look, I'm having a problem with this customer. We're trying to sell this. Here's the problem. We're getting this objection. Has anybody else run into something like this? So how can you have a community that's devoted to sales that doesn't talk about sales?
Yeah, that's deep right there. It's the truth too. It's the truth. I think about all the psychology that I never got taught in 6 different sales trainings. Nobody explained to me the universal buyer's journey. Nobody bothered to explain to me social paradigms. None of them bothered to train me on, using cognitive dissonance, how to create, that compelling persuasion using universal principles of influence. None of these things that like psychologists and economists and counselors have been doing for decades, right? Decades. You think about something like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Mm-hmm. It's like every seller should be trained in CBT. It's literally how to persuade others, right? How to get to the core understanding of, and that's what Chris Voss hacked, right? That's all. When you listen to Chris Voss and he's just saying like, yeah, it's just basic psychology. We just dumbed it down as far as we could and then use it for negotiations. It turns out it's as useful for buying a used car as it is for freeing hostages.
Yeah, well, I mean that's an example, right, of how sellers learn. Right? So if I were to ask you is, how did you learn how to sell? Who taught you how to sell? Right? We all have influence. And assume the baseline is we all have experience, right? And we're all out there in the market. We're learning some from experience. But on top of your experience, the influences that taught you how to sell, if you had to sort of divide between coaches, peers, customers, company-provided training, and your own self-development, books, podcasts, online trainings you do on your own. If you had to total those up so they all equaled 100%, what would they be for you?
Peers, for sure. Myself, little bit of the managers, very little bit. And then some of the courses there sort of at the end. That's kind of the stack ranking.
So take that, because this is not unusual. I've been asking this question of guests is, and this is obviously about as scientific as anything else that anybody's done about sales, but is the employer provided training always comes in last?
Yeah.
Not always, but almost always has come in last in terms of, and I think of my own case is, I've been in sales for 4 decades. I had 8 weeks of classroom training my first year, and that's been it.
Yeah.
Right. And I've sold 2/3 of $1 billion myself. Right. So it's like, what I learned, I learned from my coaches and mentors. I learned from my customers. I learned reading books and listening to tapes in my car. Earl Nightingale, Zig Ziglar, old names back when I was driving between sales calls before I started flying around the world to sales calls. But it's in company provided training was last.
Yeah.
And yet here's an industry it's a $20 billion a year industry in the United States, sales training.
That's wild.
And-
I can't believe it's
and
that much.
And seemingly,
What?
well, I found this statistic on the internet, so it must be true. But I mean, it's
Yeah.
we'll take that as a data point. It's like,
Yeah.
holy cow, we're spending all this money on it, but anecdotally, granted, but talking to a broad spectrum of people, people always think, gosh, I get the least out of the company provided training. Most people actually, you're sort of unusual so far in the answer again, that most people have a coach or a mentor as sort of the primary influence on them. It certainly was for me in my development. But yeah, the training's always last.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. And the thing about it is this, it's like, I think about the curse of knowledge and how much I was cursed by every company that I started with, and how they tainted my ability to actually connect to the buyer, because
really? How so?
they would day one just throw me right into the product and all this stuff about the company history and this and that. And then guess what? The next thing I wanted to do, talk about everything I just learned. Here's our company history. Here's what our product does. And this is our roadmap. And I'm like, guess what? Nobody cares. We just, we've got the whole setup wrong. To talk about, like, if the process is just producing what it should, right? The outcomes are perfectly aligned to what the process creates. So if we're seeing that people don't want to talk to salespeople, and salespeople don't want to call themselves salespeople, right? And buyers will do anything they can to get as much information they can before they get on the phone with that salesperson, if they have to at all, right?
Yeah,
That's just the process producing those outcomes. It's all.
Yeah, it's perfectly designed to produce the results it gets. Well, so you talk about connecting with customers is certainly the foundation of sales, and yet the way we set up our model, at least for inside sales, is we have some dedicated employees calling prospects, potential buyers, with the express purpose of getting a meeting for someone else. And how we talk about, gosh, we want these people to become proficient at having good conversations with buyers, but it's, for most of them, it's sort of a one and done type thing.
Yeah.
How can they connect?
It's true. Yeah. And I go back to, because you mentioned I had a weird number one there, which was my peers. The reason why is because that's how I learned to combat the curse of knowledge. I would stop. I would learn from what my peers were teaching their buyers, because then I would be seated as a buyer. Yep. And, if the product or the manager or the sales trainer, whoever it was, would tell me about something, I'd be like, I didn't see that in any of the demos. I didn't see a single prospect asking about that. And I didn't see that included in any follow-up emails. So therefore it doesn't exist, because to the prospect, it doesn't exist. The more I can align myself to that viewpoint, the better I can manipulate the social paradigm when I'm actually on a call with a prospect. And when I do that, I immediately beat the curve, because that's all I need to do, right? I don't need to be a sales genius. I just need to be better than the average, boring, horrible LinkedIn message / email / phone call that prospect gets. That's a good thing. And the good news is it's a low bar.
The bar is very low, and I've
low.
I've written this before. Is you just have to be smarter than what's on your website.
Yeah.
That's really it for a salesperson, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's a very, very low bar.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this gets back to this conversation about how where you learn sales from and so on is we underestimate, even though we talk a lot about it, we underestimate the importance of that connection. Because to your point is you just have to be a little bit better. If I were to ask you, if you're reflect back on one of your sales opportunities, one that you're proud of that you won, and asked you, well, how much did you win by? What would you tell me?
Just enough.
Yeah. I mean, can you quantify? Yeah, is 5% better? Is 10% better? I was, it's not about price, right? It's so how much better were you?
Yeah.
So how much better do you need to be in order to win? I said 1%.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that 1% could be how I initially connect with someone. Could be that initial conversation. That could carry through that 1%.
yeah. I always go. I tell this to new sellers. Any of the SDRs that I've had, Andy, I always tell them this. I'm like, we've all had that feeling where we thought somebody was looking at us, and we turn around, and sure enough, we catch a pair of eyes that were looking at us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, how on earth did we know to look, 180 degrees behind us and see those pair of eyes? But we got that feeling that somebody was looking at us. That same unconscious vibe comes off in your phone calls, comes off in your emails, comes off in whatever, all the communication you're going to do with that person. And those nonverbal cues are going to be paramount to the outcome. They're going to be paramount to the outcome. So, your ability to get reciprocity from them, your ability to get genuineness from them, your ability to get, whatever it is that you want out of them is going to be completely predicated on you being the first one to make the social bid, to start the relationship, right? Which means you're going to have to be open. You're going to have to be provocative. You're going to have to be unexpected. You're going to have to be delightful. All things that we're not comfortable doing, right? Because it opens us up for rejection. But that's great sales.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think even to some degree though, it's great, provocative and so on. But the bar is so low, right? That it's, people tend to put more in that than what it really is. Provocative could just be a really good first question you ask that's based on some degree of insight into the customer's business and what generally they're trying to accomplish. But I think one of the problems we get into is that we generalize that as opposed to making it more specific. So I think that sales tends to get a little bit lazy because marketing is saying, hey, here are these personas, which is good information to have. But a lot of times sellers don't realize that there's actually a person at the end of that persona. So we sell to people, not personas. So how do you take that sort of generalized set of cues you're getting and hints, and then make it human?
Absolutely.
And it could just be a great question that gets somebody to think in a way that perhaps they hadn't been thinking before. We can do that. In fact, we should be arming SDRs. We should be arming AEs with these questions that they can customize, tailor to their own situation, to their own personal strengths, because not everybody's going to ask all questions as effectively. But we sort of put them out there on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? If we take a step back and we look at, this is interesting because everything you're saying makes complete sense. And then let's jump to the reality of what we see in sales today. Let's go to any job description, an average job description for a sales role, like on Indeed or Monster, any major job board. And let's look if they are trying to find people who think this way, who are critical thinkers, who understand great listening skills, or no, right? We're not going to find any of those things listed. We're going to find words like hungry, expert, aggressive.
No, I said extroverts, not expert.
Extroverts, extroverts, aggressive, outspoken personalities, A-type personalities, right? We see that, just complete nonsense.
Well, nonsense on two fronts. First is, you write your job description like that, you automatically exclude 51% of the population who are female, who look at that language and think, "Oh, I don't want to work in that culture." And yet, those are the people you want to have selling your product.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean that's perhaps the biggest mistake right there. But the second part is that you should be writing job descriptions based on taking a piece of paper and saying, well, what does the buyer need from us in order to make a decision? Right, that's our job. Yeah, I love this quote I had from Jeffrey Bezos. I put in one of my books. Is, your job as sales is to help your customer make a purchase decision, not to buy your product. Your job is to help them make a purchase decision.
Yeah.
If you do it right, they'll buy your product. But if that's the case, take that as your baseline. Say, okay, well, what do we need in our salespeople what qualities, what attributes, what experience, what capabilities do we need in our salespeople in order to help the buyers make a purchase decision? Start there.
Yeah. Agreed. And you know what, that language that we see that has somehow, transcended space and time and has like crept into every job description of sales across the world, that to me is a sign of culture, right? Because language is a sign of culture, the words that we use, the mentality that we have. And for me, like the death to fluff victory, right? Well, the day we can lay down death to fluff in its own deathbed and like call it a day, a good fight won, is the day that language is no longer considered the standard, the norm, the accepted language of a sales job description. Because that means we've changed the mentality and culture of the hiring managers, of HR, of the trainers, of the company on what they think their sales force can and should be doing.
Yeah, I mean, it means that, shocking, we suddenly became truly buyer-oriented as opposed to sales-oriented.
Yeah.
And these are not new lessons. Yeah, go back 40 years, 50 years, 70 years. The lesson has been the same. Read the books. They all talk about the same thing. And it's like we're having to reinvent this with every generation, is this idea that let's start with the customer. What do they need? How can we help them make a decision? And if we can do that, then, hey, that's 90% of the battle. It's not about selling our features and our price and our delivery and the tangible things. It's like, so what do we do before they get to that point where they're considering those things? How do we influence the choices they're going to make in terms of how they want to solve their problem, not who they want to solve it with? And all sellers are focused on the who part. Who are they going to choose to solve the problem, as opposed to saying, how are we working with the buyer to help them decide how to solve that problem?
And
if I'm that person, I win that deal.
Yeah. Oh, I'm with you. We can even look at it like this. Here's like a tactical example of exactly what you're describing on how far sales teams are removed. The common go-to generic vanilla, stages in the CRM for a seller include things like demo, purchase, negotiation, words like that, right? Those are the sort of stages.
Right.
None of those are the buyers, right? Those are the sellers.
Yeah,
we don't say things like they're interested, they're aware of our product, they're currently evaluating options in the market. We happen to be one of them, right? Imagine if we put the buyer stages as the actual stages that a seller had to describe their pipeline, and the empathy, the tactical empathy that would create in them thinking about the buyer's journey and obsessing over it. But you would be hard pressed to find a single company that doesn't have those generic, vanilla cookie cutter things in their CRM. Despite
the fact that nearly 2 years ago, Gartner published their buyer enablement research study that said, if you saw the flow chart of how the buying journey, it's not a linear stage-driven process like you just described. It's this, they call it, in fact, Gartner calls it their spaghetti diagram. It's like you took a handful of cooked spaghetti and threw it against the wall. That's what the flow chart looked like. But they said at the heart of it, there are 4 jobs that buyers have to do, 4 jobs to be done. Identify the problem, research potential solutions, build your specification or your requirements document, choose a vendor. That's it. 4 jobs. And so in sales, unfortunately, everybody's focused on job 4. So, I mean, you can't go a day on LinkedIn without reading somebody talking about, how do you deal with companies got RFPs? Well, it's like, that's the end of their process. They've been in that process for a while. You missed it. Right? Yep. You were so focused on being the vendor selected, you missed the whole 3 jobs before that.
Yep.
So a perspective for buyer or sellers to have is to say, when I'm engaging with a buyer, they're hiring me to help them make a decision on this. Think about it that way. There's a job they have to be done. They've actually got 4 jobs to be done. They're hiring me to help them get those jobs done.
Yeah, I love that. That's exactly the right mentality. And this is a funny thing, Andy. If we brought on a smattering of sales leaders here, they'd all nod their heads and agree. right? We'd get this big heads going up and down and some applause and this and that. Then they go back to their sales floor, and there's a big dashboard of all the metrics that they track, half of which are useless. They are constantly reminding their sellers and stack ranking them exactly where they are. And, they are talking about crushing quota and killing this and hunting that. And so you're like, well, where was it? I thought we were in agreement, right? Like, I thought we were all saying this made sense. And then, but you don't operationalize or manifest any of that in your processes. And going back to your spot on quote, right? The system is just producing it's a precise outcome of what the system should produce, right? Because none of it's operationalized. And to me, it's like, it's not hard to, again, I'm no sales genius, but I've already advised a couple of startups to put the buyer's journey as their stages in their CRM, and it worked. And sellers liked it because then I was getting accurate pipelines. Because sellers were like, it feels like it could be a deal, but the buyer's clearly just aware but not interested right now. I'm like, great, then put them in the aware stage. They're not interested, and therefore we don't forecast that pipeline. And they're like, oh, that's easy. Now I don't have to fluff my pipeline. I'm like, no, you don't. You get to be honest. Just tell me the truth. Wild, right? But that seemed like revolutionary.
But I think that highlights an interesting point, though, which is that why don't sales managers operationalize some of that, these ideas that we talked about? And I think it's because they're operating primarily from a position of fear. Mm-hmm. So I think this is the driving factor in so many sales managers' lives is, that sounds like a good idea, but see, it's hard to be blamed too badly if we fail using the prescribed process. But if I recommend that we do something completely different and it fails, oh man, I'm really exposed.
True.
And I think this operates for sellers as well. Right, so they're not being encouraged by the managers to take chances, to become the best version of themselves as a seller, because the manager is nervous that if they do that, they might not hit their metrics. And if they don't hit their metrics, oh my gosh, we might not hit our targets. As opposed to give people the freedom to become, to maximize and optimize their own skills to become the best version of themselves. And I think we've got this fear sort of operating up and down, and it's why we're not changing anything.
I love that point, because I think about Google's Project Oxygen and how they identified psychological safety as the common denominator to all world-class teams that they had, regardless of sales, right? And I think about myself as somebody who is, I'm a practicing Muslim. I have, a moral code that I follow as part of my faith. Mm-hmm. And that has always been a driving factor in how I behaved on the sales floor. I truly wanted to compete with myself. I was not concerned with the affairs of others, because I believe there's everybody's going to get theirs, right? The world's big enough. Everybody can get theirs, and I can still get mine. There's enough to go around. I believe the infiniteness of God. So there's no constraints, right? There's no resource constraint in my mind. Right. But unfortunately, right there, like you pointed out, there's going to be a huge swath of leadership that don't understand that don't practice that don't have that in their own personal lives, so it doesn't show up in the professional scenario either, the professional environment, and it's going to hamstring even the best of talent.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're talking about, and we'll sort of close with this. I mean, you're talking about values and character, and I could maybe count on one hand personal experience working with companies that actually incorporate screening for values and character in the people they hire.
Yeah.
And so we go back to the question I asked you before, who taught you how to sell? It's actually a sixth category. And I say one of the biggest causes of poor salescraft, and at the beginning level in terms of connecting and at a human level with people, is bad parenting. People just aren't brought up with learning the right values, and not right mean there's one set, but that value other human beings, right? That start from a position of respect with someone else that they're working with, that understand that, if I'm dealing with a prospect, they're giving me some of their time. I need to give them something of value in return from that time. Otherwise, they're going to stop giving me their time. Or, so I need to have that level of respect. Or the level of respect that I was taught with my parents is to, if you, when as a kid, if you meet a grown-up, ask them a question, right? Be interested in them. Have a conversation. These things I think are inculcated at really early ages. And it's like, I'm somewhat facetious about bad parenting being the cause of bad sales, but not entirely.
Yeah. Yeah, you're making me reflect now. You can't see me, but I'm like literally like in deep reflection because it's true. I think about all the times my parents told me, speak good or remain silent, which is like a prophetic saying that was often repeated in my household.
Right.
And how much that probably helped me in my sales career because I didn't leave that with me. That was carried through on the cold call. It was carried through on the email. It was carried through on the demo. And maybe that was enough of a subtle change, going back to what we talked about earlier, for people to see something different in me, that 1% difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. We could go on forever. We'll have you come back. We'll talk more. This has been a lot of fun.
Like, I appreciate it. It's an honor and a privilege. I'm so glad. Thanks for having me, Andy.
Well, good. Well, I think the audience is going to get a lot out of this. So appreciate joining. So if people want to connect with you and follow you on Death to Fluff and so on, is tell them how to do that.
Yeah, the best. So, LinkedIn, if you're lazy, I'm there. I'll be posting almost every day. If it gets fluffy, you have full license to call me out on it. That's the target I put on my back. And then we have a community of sellers. I think we're over 900 now at deathtofluff.bravado.co. I really view that as a safe place, same tribe, same language for people to talk about this sort of stuff. Because what I've learned is that people, like, bad sales management has like transcended space and time. Like, it's just everywhere. And everybody knows that feeling of faking dials and having their commission check played with and all the kind of shared misery of sales. So it helps to know you're not alone. It helps to know you're not crazy for feeling that stuff is wrong. And that's a community to find some like-minded people.
Perfect. All right. Belal, thank you. We'll look forward to doing it again shortly.
Thank you.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. We're so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank my guest, Belal Batrawy, for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you could also leave us a rating and a review and let us know how we're doing, we'd certainly appreciate it. And you can do all that on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this podcast is over. So thank you for your help. And thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. RingDNA is the leading sales enablement platform that uses AI to help scale business growth. Trusted by the top companies across the globe, RingDNA offers a suite of powerful tools for every sales role. The RingDNA Dialer radically improves sales productivity and call connection rates, while guided selling helps reps know exactly what to do and when to do it. Conversation AI uses artificial intelligence to surface the most impactful coaching opportunities in real time. So, no matter where your team is working from, the RingDNA platform can help them exponentially increase call connections, opportunities, and revenue. Learn more at ringdna.com/platform. That's ringdna.com/platform.